welcome to another edition of Inside the Burrow, the FAU podcast for and by fans. My name is Dan. I am joined as usual. We got the whole gang back, so Jack and Shane. And tonight we are going to go over the biggest game of the year that we have after UCF here. We have UNC Charlotte, or Charlotte as they will become to be known. So this game, huge for really both fan bases. We're both 2-2 heading into conference play. There's a lot to be gained, maybe a little bit less to be lost, but there's certainly a lot to be gained. A little backstory on this. There's a lot to be compared between the two teams, where the series is 2-2. The road team has won every single game, which bodes well for us. The first one, if you remember back in, I think 2015, was Charlie Partridge's first road win. Maybe it was 2014. Is that the road win where there was like 15 fumbles? It was raining the whole game. O.C. Rose had the game-sealing pick six. Then the following year was the Hurricane game where FAU probably got robbed, and we deserved to lose that game anyway, so it didn't really matter. Then a year after that was 2017, really controlled the game. That was much of a game. And then last year, the last second kick that really just we weren't going to go to a bowl game anyway with 6 wins, but we were 5-7 in Lane's second year. So I definitely think there's a lot to think about in this game, and we also have a special guest later on in the show. But it's really I don't know what to say much about it other than I'm pretty nervous because certainly I think there's just so much that can go well for us. But I don't know. I'm just kind of rambling at this point because I'm just too nervous about the game. Shane, what do you think?
This is a huge game, but I don't want to overstate it that if we come up short, kind of thinking big picture. Like I kind of hinted on the podcast after the Wagner game, the goal is 2 of the next 3. You win 2 of the next 3, the schedule gets much lighter after that. FU will be well favored in every other game until the end of the year. We play Southern Miss, so we'll have like a 4-game stretch. So even if you lose this week, or kind of what we predicted at the beginning of the year, 8-4 is still extremely within reach in going to a bowl game, 7-5. If we win this game, we really start to control our own destiny, because then you have a bye week and 2 games at home against Middle Tennessee and Marshall, probably your biggest competition in the East this year. I've tried to play the scenario of how this game might go over and over in my head. Benny LeMay is the best running back in the conference. Got over 4 yards a carry versus Clemson. The guy averages 6.5 yards a carry. I mean, that's insane. Those are Devin Motor Singletary numbers. I don't even know. I think Motor, and I could be wrong, I'm not looking at it, in 2017 averaged, I think, just a hair over 6. So this guy's another half yard. He doesn't run like Motor. He's big. He's a grinder. He can just wear down your defense. They've seemed to found their quarterback this year in Chris Reynolds, who's, he's kind of like Mason Fine in a way, smaller but athletic. They have a home run hitter in Aaron McCaster. Sorry if I butchered that name. But in a weird way, they're not as deeply talented as we were, but they have a lot of similarities to our 2017 team. Kind of a athletic quarterback that's good at managing the game, 2 really good running backs. So this is definitely going to be a challenge for us.
LeMay reminds me of Alfred Morris more, but I think he's a little faster than Alfred was.
Yeah, I mean, there's very similarities. Kind of a one cut and go guy. I mean, I think we're gonna be able to put points on him. A lot of people we've kind of talked to, and I've read the Conference USA message boards and Twitter, and it seems like this game is split 50-50 everywhere. I think we're going to be able to score on them. Their run defense is not great. They have some injuries in their front 7. They lost one of their better safeties after the App State game. But, App State's a team they put 41 points on. App State just beat UNC. So it's, this is definitely a good football team. But there's so many similarities to us. I mean, their schedule was they had a couple easy games. They played a top 5 team in Clemson. And, they lost kind of a tough game to App State. Obviously App State isn't UCF, but, there's a lot of similarities there.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to think about, Charlotte and the similarities they have to FAU. I look back to the past 4 meetings between the two teams. The series is split 2-2 with the road team winning all the previous games. But every game seems to be close. There seems to be some sort of controversy. I think one of the most painful things from last year was probably after the too many men on the field against Louisiana Tech, or sorry, the 2 players with the same number on the field.
Oh, yeah.
In that punt return against Louisiana Tech when it was Motor and Amon Ross both on the field at the same time.
Yeah.
The second most painful thing from last season would probably be the true freshman from Charlotte, Jonathan Cruz, hitting that massive field goal to prevent us from going bowling. And that was like Charlotte's Super Bowl, if you will. The players went nuts. The fan base went nuts.
It was their coach's last game. You got fired. We lost to a fired coach.
Yeah, coach's last game. Defensive coordinator left. He's now at FAU, Glenn Spencer. So it's just it was pretty embarrassing. So I just feel like this is kind of like an underrated rivalry. The hatred isn't there as much as FIU, Marshall, Middle Tennessee, but especially after the bad taste in our mouth from last year, I think we have something to prove here. That being said, I think it will be a shootout as well. Hopefully Larry McMahon can have a big day because we need something from our running backs. Their front 7 are a bit depleted. So if that's something that we can expose, then let's go ahead and do it. Let's build some confidence in the running game. Hopefully we can create some holes. But if it's a shootout and it goes to a last-second field goal again and Jonathan Cruz as a kicker that's walking out there, I'm probably going to lose 5 years of my life from stress because I'm not looking forward to that one bit.
Jack, I find it interesting that you brought up the running game. I mentioned on the podcast on Sunday that there could be some changes in the O-line. I really want to know how quick of a hook BJ and Ian might have this week. Desmond Noel played in that last series with Nick Tronti. I kind of theorize it might happen after the bye week coming up, but this is such a big game, and they've been trying to work him in. It actually was reported today by Jake Ellum that he was given the last scholarship that FAU had available, so he's now on scholarship. So, I don't think Lade's going to mess around with this game. But I do ultimately think unless Benny Lamel just takes over and there's nothing we can do and he is just gashing us for 6 yards at a time and kind of bleeding us to death, and Chris Robinson is watching from the sidelines, I think we're deeper, and I think we're going to make enough big plays to win this game. I mean, top to bottom, our roster is better, but they are good in the right positions, and Will Healy's a good young coach. So, Jack, just to also kind of rebound on what you're going to say, about kind of the rivalry, these programs are so similar. Both newer football programs, they're both in metro areas.
Yeah.
If you kind of hover, I read on some of the Conference USA boards, it's kind of that feeling of the new guy in the metro market kind of fighting with the Southern Miss, La Tech, and Marshall fans, the schools that, you need to jump out of an airplane to get into their cities. So Charlotte, I know they've been kind of the doormat, but like you were saying, Jack, it's like big school in a quickly growing city, probably one of the bigger cities in the South, and they're in a great area for recruiting. North Carolina, they could hop, skip, and a jump to recruit Atlanta. So it's a program that's going to grow, so I can kind of see this series becoming really interesting in the future.
Yeah, and they've got a couple kids from Florida.
Who doesn't?
Yeah, I was going to say every team in the country has a couple.
Who doesn't?
Well,
But
I think that's partly why there's this little rivalry starting to grow a little bit, because not only have the games been close, but the culture of the programs and the culture of the campus is so similar to each other, where we do feel like we're the constant underdogs, and we're not just competing for fans, we're competing for the attention of our own students, and we're competing for the attention of our own city 24/7, 365. That being said, I want to piggyback on what you guys were talking about earlier, just about how big this game is. We win this game, guys, we're in the race for Conference USA. That's it. With Middle Tennessee and Marshall coming up at home after the bye week, we're in that race. Like you said it earlier, Shane, we're in control of our own destiny. If we lose this game, okay, no big deal. We're kind of where we thought we would be. Maybe we can surprise Middle Tennessee. I doubt we'll be able to surprise Marshall, but at least a win here just does a lot, man. It does a lot. Remember when we were talking about UCF, which would be more about winning a game against UCF or FIU? I think we kind of forgot about this one as well. But we didn't really know how good Charlotte was going to be, but a win against Charlotte could really springboard our campaign in reclaiming that Conference USA crown.
I'm not going to, and I know, like Charlotte still kind of has that name, and people still think of them, and their SMP rating isn't that great. If we go up there and lose a close game because Benny LeMay, just kind of tore us up, and a player that's ultimately might win Conference USA Offensive Player of the Year, did that. So what, kind of? Our season's not over. You still have a bye week and 2 big home games coming up, but definitely more positive that can come out of this game.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I think I don't know if we'll be okay. I mean, he still ran for 80-something yards against Clemson, but I'm confident in our defensive line to be able to get pressure on the quarterback and kind of stop the run lanes. And Shane, you mentioned this before we started talking. We held Wagner to minus 16 yards in rushing. So
6 yards, yeah. But we're still 94th in the country.
Yeah, I think UCF and Ohio State had
so
to do with that.
We'll see. Honestly, this week, let's just we're not going to stop them.
Yeah,
This isn't what you're saying, but like your goal inside is let's hold them to under 200. That might even be too big of a number. Enforce some turnovers. Yeah. And we can obviously not give up possessions to them, because the more carries he gets, anytime football 101, you get a big back, and he's out there grinding, and they have other backs, like I mentioned. I didn't even mention Ishad Finger, who's averaging over 8 yards a carry for them. They're getting close to a first down every single time one of their running backs touch the ball.
Right.
So it's pretty deja vu. Is this what other podcasts sound like when they're talking about us the last couple years?
Right. Yeah. All right, and now we have David from the Charlotte Observer, who is going to help give us a little bit perspective on this Charlotte team that I think a lot of FAU fans are kind of looking at the schedule. They're looking at this game thinking, well, this might not be the same Charlotte, although, I think in years past, many people, especially in Conference USA, would look at Charlotte and think of, okay, well, we can pencil in a W there. But I think that's certainly not the case, and we really can't say that ever with FAU. Certainly last year is an example of that. But it seems as if this Charlotte team is a little bit different. They're certainly scoring a lot more points. I know they've scored more than 40 points in 3 out of the 4 games, I believe. So, David, what do you think has been the biggest, I don't want to say turnaround, but maybe the biggest factor into this kind of upbeat Charlotte team?
Well, the biggest difference, guys, obviously, is a new coach. Will Healy replaced Brad Lambert, who was fired at the end of last year. In fact, the game against FAU was his last game as Charlotte's coach. They hired Will Healy from Austin Peay, and Tennessee, and he had turned around that program, which was just in dire straits before he got there 4 seasons ago. And he brought them, completely turned that program around, and was hired at Charlotte last December. He's a young guy. He's 34. He's the second youngest coach in FBS, and he has really come in and injected a lot of enthusiasm and kind of energy that the program had been lacking over the last couple of years. And that's the main thing. He does things differently. His practices are wide open, a lot of music playing. He encourages the players to really celebrate things and to dance around and have fun and enjoy things. In fact, last spring, I think it was, there was something great happened in practice, and the players didn't celebrate enough, so he had them all run laps as punishment because they didn't celebrate enough. So it's that kind of thing that he's brought to the team. The team itself is it was a good defensive team last year. They have a lot of starters back. Offense was a bit of a question mark because of the quarterback situation. But they've got a quarterback in Chris Reynolds who beat out a couple of accomplished guys, especially Brett Keane, who had come from USF, was a grad transfer, didn't play much there, but was obviously an FBS caliber quarterback. But Chris Reynolds beat him out for the job after doing it last year. The same thing from another kid from Florida, Miami, grad transfer Evan Sheriffs, who came up here. So he's kind of been able to stiff arm away these challenges for the starting job, and has done a really good job. And so the offense has been really clicking until the Clemson game, obviously last year, and that's been the big difference. They've really been able to score points this season. They weren't able to do that consistently last year. Last year the defense carried him a lot. This year they've got a lot of injuries defensively. They've got like 4 frontline players who've been hurt for much of the season, and it's questionable who's going to be able to play Saturday against FAU. So it's been the offense with a quarterback who makes plays. He's got a good core of wide receivers, young guys, and then Benny LeMay, the tailback, who is one of the best in the conference, is doing his thing like he has for the past couple seasons.
David, you went all that time, and I'm thinking, when is he going to mention LeMay? We've been
yeah.
We've been talking about LeMay about all week, guys, about how he's the real deal. I think FAU fans, I think we all know about what a good G5 running back looks like with Motor Singletary, Kareth White, Alfred Morris. The list goes on. David, just talk about how legit Benny LeMay is. How much of a threat is he? He had, 4.5 yards per carry against Clemson last week. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was going to say, ask Dabo about him. They were able to contain Chris Reynolds, and so they knew all they had to do was stop Charlotte on the ground, and they really couldn't do it. The 49ers rushed for 152 yards. LeMay had 81 of them. He is a north-south kind of guy, very patient, picking his holes, but he's a bruising, thick kind of runner who finds his holes, and then it's really hard to bring him down. And this year he's kind of taken it to a new level. So he's a guy that I think Charlotte really relies on and needs to play well if they're going to keep this going.
Do you feel Charlotte fans, and you kind of mentioned the play of Chris Reynolds, and it seemed like a couple of those games they were able to just kind of put it on the ground and win by just running the ball. Charlotte fans feel confident yet if they needed to, let's say, and I know the App State game was a shootout, and that's probably his best game of the season. If they had to win a shootout game, do they have enough confidence that he could do that at this point?
Yeah, I think so. One of the perceived weaknesses coming in was lack of depth at receiver. They lost 2 of their 3 top receivers to graduation, but they had 2 guys coming back, Victor Tucker, who's from Miami, and Rico Arnold, another freshman last year. Both had really good years. Arnold got hurt in the summer, and so he was out. And so they actually really just had 1 proven receiver returning. But it's turned out a lot of these young kids, some freshmen, Michaelis Elder, Noah Henderson, are true freshmen and have played well, and then a couple guys who kind of have had to wait their turn, like Cam Dollar, have really come around. So that's, 5 or 6 guys I mentioned right there who have all been a part of this offense. Victor Tucker has really played well. He played well against Appalachian State, had 2 touchdown passes, 2 touchdown catches in that game, and he's become their go-to guy and continues to be. But they've got a lot more depth at the receiver position, much more than they expected, and that's been kind of a bonus. Clemson took that away from them the other night, but I think getting back in the Conference USA, it's going to be something that they can rely on.
FAU is obviously, a deeply talented team. Lane's been here a little longer, been here building a little longer than Healy. What's kind of the confidence level amongst the team and the fans kind of going into this game? As an FAU fan, we just have to go back to last year, but this series has been wild. As I think we kind of mentioned that the last 4 games have all been won by the road team. Even a game a few years ago that was played on a Sunday in a hurricane, if there was a bad call and a Hail Mary. All these games seem to have been kind of wild. What's kind of the confidence with the fan base in that?
I think there's a lot of confidence. I think a lot of it has to do with that Healy still is in somewhat of a honeymoon period. So they had 2 easy wins against Gardner-Webb and UMass. They played App State strong, not to the wire, but they played them. They were competitive well into the fourth quarter. Clemson kind of went how they expected. So I think they've come through their non-conference schedule kind of how they hoped it would be, and going off last year's improvement in the conference. You got to remember Charlotte's just 2 years away from a 1-11 team, and they improved to 5-7 last year. So I think they're thinking that they can be really competitive in the league this season. FAU is a team they beat last year, albeit on a last-second field goal. But so I think they've got confidence that this is a team that they can be competitive with, if not beat. And Healy is that kind of coach that he really injects that kind of confidence and enthusiasm in the team. And I know they turned the page really quickly from Clemson, thinking, okay, now it's time for conference play, and FAU is the first team out there. And so, yeah, I think they're confident, but obviously they respect FAU and Coach Kiffin and what they can do.
I got a question about matchups. I guess what do you think the biggest matchup that Charlotte? I guess I'll ask this question first. What do you think the biggest matchup that FAU should have to be concerned with outside of Benny LeMay on offense?
I think it's probably at the wideout with a guy like Victor Tucker, who has shown that he can get open. He doesn't have a ton of speed. He's not a breakaway threat, but he's one of these guys that when he gets the ball, he goes. He's got, I guess they call it, after you catch it kind of speed. And he can present real problems because Reynolds is the shifty quarterback. He's only 5'10", but he can step out of the pocket and deliver the ball. So I think the one thing I think the opposing defenses have to be careful of is stacking the box against LeMay, and then having Reynolds be able to have all these guys available to him. And Tucker is the leading guy with that.
I know you just actually kind of mentioned it, going off what Dan was saying, kind of the reverse of the question. I know you mentioned there's kind of a lot of injuries up front, and it does seem that there's been a little bit of weakness in giving up a lot of rushing yards this year. I know you guys also lost the safety, Ben DeLuca, and me kind of asking this a question based on FAU strength. How strong is your guys' secondary at this point?
Well, that's the thing, and it's they changed. Healy came in and changed the formation from a 4-3, and they now play more of a 4-2-5, which stresses getting to the quarterback, and it has worked to a degree this year. But with the kind of injuries they've had, Ben DeLuca as a safety, Jeff Gemmel, the middle linebacker, who's kind of the heart and soul of the defense. Tyreek Harris is a defensive end who has had a really strong career, and then a true freshman who played really well in the first couple of games, named Prince Bima, who is out now with an ACL. So those are 4 guys that they really have counted on that are going to be gone. So they need guys to step up. The main guy who obviously is still there is Alex Highsmith, the other defensive end who's had All-American conversation about him before the season and is really stepping into that. So, I think what's going to happen here is Charlotte's depth is really going to be tested, and it has been the last couple of games, and teams, frankly, have been able to score on them. So I think you were talking about a shootout earlier, that there's probably going to be some games, and Saturday may be one of them, where if Charlotte wants to win, they're going to have to rely on just outscoring the opponent.
I'm happy you mentioned Highsmith there, David, because I think he's a stud. I think he's one of the players that Rashad Smith, FAU linebacker, is going to have to compete with for Defender of the Year in the conference. When you mentioned the game last year, though, you mentioned the last-minute field goal. I wish you saw all of our heads just shaking in anger. Jonathan Cruz, that field goal from that freshman has haunted Owl Nation for almost a year now. Real quick, is he still as good as he was on that night back in Boca last year?
Well, yeah. I mean, he's the real deal. He hasn't had. I think he's only got 2 or 3 field goals this year. He's clutch. He makes them from long distance. He's obviously very cool under pressure. And yeah, he's not a one-hit wonder by any chance. He's the real deal and continues to prove it.
All right. Well, I think we'll kind of get you out on this question here. What do you think as far as I guess we'll go back to the matchup thing. What do you think is one key matchup, and then what do you think would be your prediction for the game?
Well, I think the matchup, just generally speaking, is can Charlotte's defense, and this is just from the Charlotte perspective, can Charlotte's defense kind of finally find its way here? It's been a couple games now with key players out. It's still not certain whether or not anybody's going to be back. So I think it's going to be, can Charlotte's defense kind of finally find itself with new guys coming in, and can they finally, make a stand, but find an identity for the season? I think that'll be the key for this game. That said, I think it's going to be a high-scoring game. I think, and I don't want to predict the winner, but I think it's probably going to go either way, maybe in the 35 to 32 range, that kind of thing.
It's kind of the pace that Charlotte tries to play at. Obviously you think with LeMay in the rate that FAU runs its offense, which is constantly go, 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 go. We saw Charlotte try and defend that last year with the, dehydrated player formula in the last series before the long field goal. My biggest concern is that anytime you get a running back like LeMay out there, your offense is going so fast later in the game that could, if our defense ends up playing more snaps, can end up hurting us. I mean, does Charlotte kind of like to play at that same pace, or do they kind of want to slow the game down and use those running backs?
No, they like to keep it going. They're not a no huddle, bam, bam, bam kind of pace, but they do like to keep it going, and they play kind of a shotgun kind of system. Reynolds is very rarely under center, so things are spread out pretty much. And they like to keep that going, and that keeps the defense honest. And like you said, when they keep coming at you and then they keep banging LeMay at you, it can wear them down.
Well, maybe we'll have an advantage with the return of Glenn Spencer to Charlotte this week. Yeah.
There you go. He might hold the key. He knows those kids very well. Well, he knows them 1 year's worth, but you're right. He knows them.
He's been, our first 2 opponents, obviously, Ohio State and UCF are a little different, but I've liked a lot of what Glenn Spencer has done in kind of running that 3-3-5 hybrid. I think it fits a lot of Florida athletes down here. We've talked about it extensively on our show.
And it fits a lot of the offenses that we'll see in Conference USA as well. David.
Yeah, well, Charlotte's defense last year under Spencer was really stout, and that was the main reason why they turned things around the way they did and got, they were one win away from bowl eligibility, and the defense he had some players to work with, and he did a really good job with them.
Before we let you go, David, sorry, Dan, I just wanted to ask, before we let you go, if you can kind of talk to FAU fans in our nation about this drop UNC movement that's going on over at Charlotte right now. It's pretty prevalent on Conference USA Twitter. Just talk us through what all of that means, if you don't mind.
Well, it started several years ago when the athletic department at UNC Charlotte changed the way it was going to refer itself as, and that was just Charlotte and the Charlotte 49ers rather than UNC Charlotte or UNCC, that being the name of the school. There was confusion nationally about what UNCC was. UNC Charlotte, it was confused with UNC Chapel Hill, which is known obviously as North Carolina, the main campus of the university system. So in order to kind of get away from that confusion, they changed the name of the athletic department teams to Charlotte. And that is kind of fulminated there for a while. And now recently there has been a movement. I don't know how much steam it's really gathered beyond social media, but to change the whole name of the whole university from UNC Charlotte to University of Charlotte. And that would take obviously a whole lot of doing with the UNC Board of Governors getting involved. And I don't know that that's gone real far, but there is a lot of movement to change the name of the school and get away from the UNC aspect of it, even though it is a state school. There's lots of other colleges in the system that have the UNC in front of their names, like UNC Wilmington, UNC Pembroke, but then others like Appalachian State or North Carolina A&T or North Carolina Central, Western Carolina, they're all in the system too, but they don't have the UNC in front of them either. So I think Charlotte would kind of like to be in that latter boat and get rid of the UNC prefix altogether. But I don't know that it's going to happen anytime soon.
Well, David, we definitely appreciate you being on with us. Where can Owl fans find a little bit more about you on the web?
My Twitter handle is at DavidScott14.
DavidScott14. All right. Again, we thank you for being on with us tonight, and we look forward to this week's game. I think both teams are both fan bases are anxiously awaiting the outcome of this game to get a barometer. So again, we appreciate you being on, and I hope you have a great day.
Okay, fellas. Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, again, we thank David for being on the show with us. And this game, as a reminder, is on the NFL Network, which I think comes with most cable subscriptions. So make sure when you're flipping through the channels, you are on the right one. And, make sure to follow FAULsNest.com. Go join the conversation over there at Inside the Burrow on Twitter. And, we will be hopefully coming back on next week to go over FAU being 1-0 in conference play. So, again, we thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for following along on iTunes and YouTube and on the Nest and everything like that. So we appreciate everything there. And we will see you guys next week. Go Owls.